greatest lessons are usually learnt during the worst times and from the worst mistakes. Good evening and welcome. This is Face the Nation. We've had quite a year, 2022, and this will be the last Face the Nation program that will be aired in the year 2022. We are entering a new year, 2023, but where do we stand? What can we expect in this new year? And more importantly, where did we go wrong and how can we do things better? We will be discussing these matters and much more on our program today. And to discuss these matters, we've got a team of expert panelists. Starting from my left, we've got Dr. Pakisoti Sarvanamuthu. He is the Executive Director at the Center for Policy Alternatives. Thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation and coming on the show. We've got also, no stranger to the show, Attorney at Law Lihini Fernando, Moroto Municipal Councillor. And Lihini, as I believe, is preparing for the election as well. Good luck to you, Lihini, and thank you very much for coming on the show. We've also got Chayu Damsingha, an economist. Thank you very much, Chayu, for joining us on our show. So we will begin with Dr. Pakisoti Sarvanamuthu. Of course, looking at the past, walking into the new year, where have we gone wrong? What is the most important things to look out in 2023 as far as the country and the state of the nation is concerned?
Yeah, in 2022 we achieved a tremendous thing, and that was to get the Rajapaksas out of government. Yeah, but of course I think those who got the Rajapaksas out of government didn't necessarily have a proper plan in terms of what was to happen next. And therefore I think now we are faced with the question of getting the letters of assurance from our international creditors so that we can get the staff agreement with the IMF implemented by March, when the next IMF Board of Directors meeting is. And then in addition to that, I think the government needs to confront the question of its legality and its legitimacy. And it's the latter that I think is problematic, and that is why elections are tremendously important. And here I don't mean just local government elections, but since they're the ones that seem to be at the forefront, we must definitely have those elections. The government is also talking to the Tamil parties about a final political settlement of the national question. With regard to that, we have the 13th Amendment, which has not been implemented in full. And I think if the 13th Amendment is going to be implemented in full, then the question is, where are the provincial councils? You know, you can't really implement the 13th Amendment in full and then sit back and not have provincial councils. So we are going to have a year in which the cry is going to be for elections. The government, I suspect, is going to try and resist that as much as possible until it can find a suitable point where the people will not reject what the government has been doing wholeheartedly. So it's mitigating losses, if you like, rather than anything else. But overall, I think economically, and I'm sure you may well agree, it's going to be a very tough year. It's going to be a very tough year.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pakisoti Sarvanamuthu. We will delve in deep into more on what you said. The floor is now the chance for the Attorney at Law Lihini Fernando, Moroto Municipal Councillor. What do you think we should watch out for next year? So,
looking back at 2022, I think 2022 politically, I think was a year, I would say, which challenged many conventions, because if you look at the Aragalaya that happened from April to July, it challenged a lot of, I think the politicians also were shocked to a certain extent, where the people rose. The citizenry power came out much stronger. So the citizenry reawakening, I would say, which was also a shock to the politicians. So the standard political conventional mechanisms which they operated was also challenged, which I think, you know, which was a good thing in terms of the power of the citizen. But however, going, you know, in terms of how economically, how the country unfolded, I think most of the situations could have been avoided had the politicians in power acted with much more responsibility. For example, if you take the fertilizer crisis, to going to IMF on time, to the tax cuts, to the inflation, to artificially holding the dollar, the pegging of the dollar. So there were a lot of economic blunders that the government did, which could have been avoided. In terms of also, if you look at the budget, in terms of now we see how they have allocated money for education, for health, versus the massive amounts that they have allocated for defense. So if you really look at it, have the government understood that the country is in crisis and have they addressed the crisis is also a question. So again, we go back to the fact people who are governing, ruling us, yes, they are legitimate, but do they have the legitimacy? Are they actually representing the will of the people? So, you know, the government was thrown, the Gotabaya Rajapaksa administration was thrown out. But the people also cry out saying, you know, though the parliament, though they are in power today, we do not believe them. That is what the cry of the Aragalaya was. They came and said, we want our stolen money back. What are the initiatives that have been taken? Then we talk about the losses of the state-owned enterprises, the imminent losses that are being caused, the loss-making entities. Are there significant efforts that have been taken to reform? So actually, if you really look at it in a holistic perspective, is the government doing the right thing to take the country into the right track? Or is it that they are just still playing power politics? At the end of the day, the victim is the citizen. The citizen, you and me, are the victims. I mean, we see the Inland Revenue Bill brought in, enormous taxes are being put on the people, decisions are being taken. Are those the right decisions, rationalized decisions, or are these just piecemeal decisions? So if you look at it from a country's perspective, it is unfortunate because this is not the country that you and I wish to live, and even the young people, their dreams, aspirations, hopes are all taken away. So who is responsible? The people in power. Are they actually representing our interests is a big question. So how do we resolve this? So there are lots and lots of things that needs to be taken into account. And then you go back to laws like the draconian laws like the PTA, then high security zone gazettes that were brought in just to control the voice dissenting opinions of the people. And we say we are a democracy. So are democratic rights being given the right to express our freedom of expression? I mean, why do we get on the road? Because we are disappointed with the government. So we need to have that voice to express our dissent. So the government, are they using force to control us? So there are a lot of factors. I mean, if you look at 2022 as a whole, I would say it is a year of disappointment for the people. People are leaving this country. But then again, when you're at your lowest, should be the way for you to get to the highest. So if you actually are sincere in reforming the country, you can take the country right back. But we do not have the people sitting in that parliament. So I think, you know, we have no choice but to go for elections, and it is the right of the people. As I always say, parliamentarians, people in power, they're temporary custodians. They're not here forever, but they think that they're here forever. So it is the people's sovereign right that they represent. So the people must be given a chance to say what they feel, and we need to go for elections.
Thank you very much, Lihini. Of course, Dr. Pakisothi and Lihini both focused on the political aspect a little bit more. But Chayu, of course, being that you're an economist, and I think this will be very important for the people because they also are in a trance. People have lost their jobs, taxes are sky high, electricity tariffs are to be increased in the month of January, according to the minister. So what should we really watch out for in 2023?
So, I mean, very much I'll preface my comments by saying I will leave the political and the governance, legitimacy discussions to this side of the table. I'll bring it as required for the economics, but I think for me, the way I look at it, my view on this year, 2022 itself, is in a way a little bit more optimistic than I think was here. And in that, on the economic side of it, looking at not just Sri Lanka, but looking at the fact that this kind of debt crisis has been something that, you know, dozens of countries, if not more, have gone through in the past. The way out of it has looked very much like what Sri Lanka is going through right now. So the speed of reforms that we're seeing right now, for so far, I don't have too much of an issue on it. On the economic side, there is a question to be had on how much these reforms are going to be trusted, how much confidence people have in the system moving forward, whether people believe that is the government doing it definitely in our best interest, given the fact that successive governments over decades have not necessarily worked in people's best interest, and regardless of whether that's not true or not, people have the narrative now that governments have not worked in their best interest. So for me, the main thing that I'm looking for 2023, I feel economically that things should settle down for maybe the first half of the year, After that, things should slowly start to recover again. But that is contingent upon the government's reform agenda continuing, and that is contingent upon the government being able to convince the people through whatever means, let it be through elections, let it be through governance reform, let it be through merely better communication, whatever it takes to convince the people that this economic trajectory that the country is going on, the recovery trajectory the country is going on, is one that is both in the people's best interest, because the short term will still be painful. It'll start improving, but to get back to where we were, it'll take years. So to tell the people, look, this is going to be painful, trust us, it's going to get better later. Can the people trust the government is the question. So far on that front, I don't really see a lot happening. But again, the point is that in many countries across the world, when you have this crisis, that also hasn't been as strong as we'd expect. So I'm not as pessimistic on the future of the country. But again, it is very much contingent on all of this continuing to go down a good direction.
And how important in this equation is the involvement of the IMF?
So the involvement of the IMF is primarily in a way for us to regain the way that we engage with the international economy. So if we don't get an IMF program, or rather if it gets delayed, that doesn't mean we can't. It's just that all these things kind of get pushed further and further down the line. Our debt discussions, our creditors get pushed further down the line since a lot of this documentation isn't out publicly. It means locally more pain. But if the IMF doesn't come in, the money that comes from the IMF might not be in itself a lot, but it's a signal that allows more money from, let's say, the multilaterals, the World Bank. We've seen the World Bank do a lot of good lending to Sri Lanka this year, a lot more can be unlocked once the IMF comes in. So these things kind of get pushed more and more into the future, and that means until then, the Sri Lankan economy has to kind of maintain itself, and that will require some sort of further adjustments on, let's say, it might be on prices, it might be on interest rates. So the longer we wait and the longer things get delayed, the more pain there will be on the people, and the harder and the slower the recovery is. So ideally, very much getting the IMF as soon as possible should be a priority. As far as I understand, right now the onus is on our bilateral creditors to kind of move ahead with the discussion. So that's perhaps not a lot the government can do right now. But if, again, since the situation is so fragile, the point is, really need to bring that confidence back. Do whatever you can to say, look, things are fragile, but we are doing this, we are taking all the steps we can on our side as well to inspire that things are going to be better. We are doing our part as well. So I think that's something that might be lacking still. But again, hopefully there's more and more that comes about as more and more of the pain is felt on people, especially on the taxes, like you mentioned. Perhaps there's more and more lobbying that does force that to come. I'm yet to see that, but again, we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you very much, Chayu, for that analysis as well. We now open the floor for questions from our journalists. On my right, I've got Shanaya Dedigama, and on my left, Disal Kapukotua. Shanaya?
Thank you, Shalan. My question is for Dr. Saranamuthu. You spoke about government legitimacy. Supposing there is no general election held in the year 2023, how will this affect our IMF negotiations, and even more so, how will that lack of legitimacy hold with our external creditors?
Well, I don't know, but as I understand it, I don't think the IMF has turned around and said to the government that one of the conditionalities for getting IMF assistance is that you hold elections. That's not been said. So in that respect, that is not going to affect the staff agreement being implemented. That is awaiting the letters of assurance from all our creditors that we can go ahead and that the IMF board will agree on it. So I don't think that lack of legitimacy as a consequence of not going to the polls is a condition for IMF assistance. What it is a condition, I think, in my mind, is for. Everyone has talked about talking to the people, talking to them, getting them to accept the pain and suffering, more pain and suffering, that has to be endured in order for to get out of this. So you can only have a government who is trusted, who has the confidence of the people to be able to do that. And the question of the confidence and trust of the government surely is very much a matter of debate. And therefore, that's why I say that, look, it's not sort of saying, look, we'll have a general election day after tomorrow. But if you give a timetable for when those elections are going to happen, as opposed to saying that, look, yes, Parliament term expires in 2024 or 25 or whatever it is, then I think there will be a greater enthusiasm or a greater willingness on the part of the population to accept the pain that they have to endure.
But Dr. Pakiswati, just speaking, insinuating what would happen after an election. Local government elections are due at least to be held in March. The dates have not been announced, so we can't say for certain if the election will be held. But supposing that the election is held, and with the current situation in the country, the fear, at least among the government, is that they will not be able to secure a majority or at least a sizable amount of seats. And the opposition or the opposition parties will sweep the election. What if this does really happen? And like you said, it's proved at an election that the government does not have a mandate. Then where do we go from there?
In a democracy, the government of the day has to take on that challenge. Otherwise, what you are giving me is a perfect justification for not having any elections at all until the government feels confident that they may win them.
No, all I'm saying
is... The point is that you hold the local government elections. Mm-hmm. Say that the government of the day is rejected by the people at the local government elections, and the government has to realize that there's a problem and make amends with regard to
How do you suggest they make amends?
Well, I mean, we don't know what that election result is going to be. But if it is the case that the people are saying that, look, the middle classes are being squeezed out because of those taxes, that the government is doing insufficient, inadequate work to get back the money that people allege that the Rajapaksas have stolen, that they're not cutting down sufficiently in terms of public expenditure, then the government has to do those things. They have to show that they are listening to the people. And that's what's important. No, it's a communication with the people. In a democracy, you can't have a government which says that the people do not understand what we have to do, so let us get on and do it, and then we'll talk to them.
Dr. Pakiswati, but like if you take this year, now this year we saw the Aragale come up, and there was significant political pressure on the administration to make good on the people's demands and the people's grievances. Do you think with time, with people getting occupied with other problems and also the government very tactically playing down on the Aragale, do you think that the pressure on the government has reduced, and can we expect a reduced pressure going forward? Because we are talking about having an election if the government decides to have an election. Do you think they will?
Yes, the pressure on the government has reduced from the heyday of the Aragale.
Yeah.
The government has succeeded in coming up with a counter-narrative in terms of what happened. However, as I think we all agree, things are going to get tougher. And when they get tougher, then it's not going to be a question of we want constitutional reform or we want this money back. It might well be a question of we need food, we need medicine, we need to have our 3 square meals a day. That might be the question.
So in your opinion, can we expect another Aragale, like 2.0, 3.0, another Aragale to happen this year?
You could. You could.
So we could be walking into a year with like even more worse political turmoil.
We could be walking into a year with worse political turmoil, but let's hope and pray that it won't be that kind of year, that the government will succeed in having quietened down dissent in a democratic way.
Yeah.
Tayo, if I may direct a question, I think economically something that this country deals with is a lack of investor confidence. And I think that's down to political instability. How do you suppose we rectify that to sort of keep the economy flowing in the coming year?
So investor confidence, in my view, comes from the fact that any investor looks at Sri Lanka and says, is there a good deal for me here, right? Now, what we've tried to get, especially over the last, I think, since 2019, since the tax cuts, is the idea that, oh, Sri Lanka has low taxes, come and invest here. But I think the fact that this administration, but it's not just this administration, but even in the past, this idea that, you know, there is this secret growth engine in Sri Lanka that if you just put enough money, it'll suddenly get unlocked. I think that argument just hasn't proven itself right. For an so there are investors who will look at Sri Lanka's current economic structure and economic structure of the last, primarily over the last, 10, 15 years, but very well before that as well, for decades before that, and say this kind of structure, a structure that rewards essentially domestic consumption. I'll get I'm getting into the economic specifics of it, but basically one that rewards when the government borrows and gives directly to the people without consequence of the sustainability, what it means for the future, all of that, just consistent, unsustainable borrowings. Someone might, an investor who wants that would have come in, and we saw that kind of investors coming in as well. So the question is, what kind of investors do we need? Do we want investors that invest in Sri Lanka's actual productive capacity, in Sri Lanka's future education, in the power of the people itself, in the the education power, all of that? In that case, do we have then the environment that enables that kind of investment? Right now, I don't really see. It's ridiculously hard to do business here. Land regulations are, anachronistically difficult to deal with. Labor reform doesn't help either side in the way. So these are critical things for businesses to, see growth in. Those factors are really not touched in Sri Lanka, not helped in Sri Lanka. So I think if we are talking about investor confidence, those are things you really need to work on. For me, it's not really about the taxes. If you're having a 10% return and you get a 30% tax on that, versus if you have 40% return, you can get a 30% tax on that, you're still at a much, much higher return. I think that is where the government, any administration should aim at ending up at. It's hard, especially since the system right now is so entrenched that it resists at every level, from the citizenry down to the up to the very top. Resists changes to that structure, because that's the structure we've all gotten used to. That's the structure we've all lived in. But unless that structure does change, that foreign investment coming in, this real foreign investment seriously coming in, it's going to be very difficult.
And with the rising cost of production, I mean, there's an impending tariff hike in electricity. So are we losing markets to other sort of manufacturing hubs like Bangladesh? And
So while the cost of production is rising in rupee terms, in dollar terms, it has fallen a lot, given the fact that the currency has depreciated. So as a result of the currency depreciation, and yes, there's a lot of adjustments going on rupee terms, things are going, and some of that competitiveness is going away. As far as I understand it, the cost of production is still, Sri Lanka is on net basis more competitive now than it was, let's say, at the start of the year when everything was at 200 rupees to the dollar. So for a foreign investor, that aspect of it is quite critical. It's not the rupee side of it, it's the dollar side of it that they're looking. The way that we are losing out to peers like Bangladesh, like to Vietnam, is in terms of the business environment in Sri Lanka, which is ridiculously hard to deal with. Regulations very, very difficult to go through. I think that is where Sri Lanka is losing out to our peers.
But then, Shai, I think how serious are these adverse effects, in particularly when we talk about the power crisis, power cuts, and then the fuel crisis that could affect distribution? So how serious is this when it comes to investor confidence?
So that very much, I mean, if you have a country that has consistent large power cuts, shortages of fuel, no one wants to invest in that, right? In a sad way, it's less of a problem now, because a lot of the world, for unrelated to Sri Lanka reasons, completely dissimilar reasons, are also having power cuts, also having fuel shortage. So in a sad way, that the weakness affects us less right now, but that's very much a problem, because the reasons that's happening in Sri Lanka are very different. So you can't have that level of operational calamity. You need to have those absolute basics straight. So I think that's another big risk for 2023, is that this fuel situation, the energy situation might not work out well. If that doesn't work out well, there are ways. I mean, commodity trading is a very funny business where a lot of things happen. So it could very well actually end up working out well for Sri Lanka's operations, though how it factors into the questions of governance, on corruption, that's a completely different story. But again, that risk very much remains, and that's, I think, probably one of the number one risks economically for 2023 to kind of watch out for.
Lihini, if I can pose this question to you now, looking at elections also, there is this notion among the people said in Sinhala, unuttekai, munuttekai. Everybody is the same. I mean, as a citizen, Lihini, obviously you can understand what kind of information and what kind of thinking resulted in the people coming up with this argument. And there is also a risk, maybe even at an election, where people just wouldn't want to come out and vote because they don't see an alternative. What would you tell these people?
See, an election, a franchise is the right of the people. So it is the right that is given to you and you must exercise it. Just because you are disappointed with the governments, I mean, that is not the way to go. There are parties, within parties, yes, there are structural problems. When you say Unuttaka, there are structural problems, but within certain parties, there are also good people who are actually genuinely trying to do something. So if there is a list of candidates that are posed, there are good people. So I mean, instead of, rejecting everybody in totality, people must exercise their franchise because that is the right that is given. So not voting is far more dangerous versus, not voting is far more dangerous. So they need to exercise their franchise. That's what I want to say, tell the people. If there is an election that is called, people must come out and vote, because at the end of the day, Sri Lanka, there are structures, there are certain political structures, party structures that have been established over the years, and also parties must give nominations to new people. The structure must change. The way nominations are given must change, and you need to bring in representation, female representation, youth representation, actually a basic standard of who can be your politician at the end of the day, some educational qualification. All these reforms need to be brought in, but to do that even you need to get the right people there. So for that to happen, you need to have some government who you believe is better versus the rest. So that is where I would say, we saw what the Rajapaksas had done to this country, but then the party that I represent, I would say, Samagi Jana Balawege, in total. I mean, there are good people there who actually spoke about the crisis beforehand. I mean, there are genuine people there. So why reject them? Why not give them a chance? So, I mean, I'm not saying everybody is a saint. Everybody has their baggage, but within that, there are good people. So you must exercise your franchise and give the right people a chance to do the right thing by the people. So, and again, I want to say is this: it's not the political narrative; it is the policy. Today, people fail to understand the policy. Now, there are one couple of parties who come back and say, 74 years hatta vasaraka sape. But they forget to say that, they were also part of that government, successive governments, and they also have contributed to that SAPE. So, I mean, it's not just about, rejecting everybody and you choose us and we become the heroes, we come and we will turn this thing around. No politician, no political party is a magician at the end of the day. It should be policy based. I mean, what are we? Are we a liberal free market economy? Where are we heading as a country? So, things like that. What are the policies that the parties are offering? What is their intention when it comes to education, when it comes to health, when it comes to people's welfare, social security mechanisms, in terms of bringing the economy in the right direction? What are their policies? This is what the people of this country needs to think. You need to be more policy driven. As a voter, you need to understand, you need to be far more, I would say, educated, far more read. That is the issue in this country. The voter today, will go and vote for, the political narrative or what has been disputed.
To save the country.
To save the country, which, I mean, we saw how the racist narratives, so the snake and everything, and the country will be divided, how the narrative actually misled the people. So it is time the people understand the policies that have been offered by the parties and then vote for that. So, going forward, I think elections are important, and that is the only way to test the waters.
Dr. Pakisoti, if I just can pose one question, Dr. Pakisoti, it's called the circle of life, where things that happened in the past keep on repeating. I'm sure, Dr. Pakisoti, you'd have a lot to say on this, because Sri Lanka has gone through times like these in the past, where governments have not held elections or being reluctant to hold elections, and how the people reacted, how the people went through power cuts, extended power cuts, maybe not as much as this, but still extended power cuts. So, judging by the experience that Sri Lanka has had in the past, how do you feel 2023 would play out?
Well, I think a lot is going to depend on how the government reacts to what might be rising dissent on the part of the population for the sacrifices that they have to bear. I mean, one thing I must say, I think we Sri Lankans, irrespective of which class or ethnicity or whatever it is, we've got used to a culture of entitlement.
A culture of entitlement?
Yes. You get free education, you get free medical services, you get a job in the public service, and you're there for life. Womb to tomb number. We have to sit up and recognize that we too are responsible for what has happened. And that needs to take place by a government who we can trust and have confidence in, giving us that message and having that conversation Because if we don't have that, if you look at Sri Lankan contemporary political history, every 20 odd years or so, we have cleansed with blood.
Every 20 years?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've cleansed with blood. And we just can't afford to have that happen again. Now, of course,
We almost had it this year.
we almost have it. But this is the point. All the young people are trying to get out of this country. This is going to be a country of old people. It's going to be an economy that is a remittance economy. What happened to Jaffna is going to happen to the rest of the country.
But Dr. Pakishalti, now we have been very hopeful that if an election comes about, the tides would change, that the government would learn their lesson. But also we always see that an election is always decided by those masses that vote for the conventional things that they've always been voting for. Do you think the tide has actually changed? Do you think the people's mindset has actually changed? Because the SLP came out saying that they are confident that they can win. Do you think this is a correct statement by them, or they're reaching too far?
Look, no political party is going to come out with a statement and say that they're going to lose.
Yeah.
So, yes, they'll talk their chances up. But it is up to the existing political parties, up to the SJB, etc., to identify what made the Rajapaksas win so big in 2019 and 2020 and counter that.
On that point, I'd like to ask Lehini. So there's a sentiment among the public saying that this year actually, this year that the opposition didn't do enough, that the Aragalaya, the people only made the political movement happen, and that the opposition didn't do as much as they should have. What can we expect from the SJB, being the main political party, the opposition party in the country? What can we expect in 2023? What do you plan to do differently?
See, I don't agree with that statement. I think it's a common statement that saying SJB didn't play the role of the opposition. But I think, SJB, right from the start, prior to this crisis coming, they were the ones who, in Parliament spoke out. Dr. Harsha De Silva, Iran Wickremesinghe, even Sajid Premadas, the honourable opposition leader, they spoke out. But then the government was not actually willing to listen. They prior warned, even the COVID, measures that to be taken, they warned. But the government had a very deaf ear to the voice of the opposition. So and also we know how the media in this country plays and what they choose to publicize. So we can say that is also one of the reasons why SJB, it looks like SJB did nothing at the end of the day. But then they have always been an opposition, a responsible opposition. Opposition can play different parts. You can play the narrative like what the Rajapaksas did during the Yahapalana, where the right thing was made, the wrong thing, how the narrative was brought in, creating all these Elia and different programs every time coming to the road and crippling it. That is not the role that the opposition SJB played, but they did it a more policy-based, where they objected, where they raised their voices, where it is required. And also, I want to say that Honourable Opposition Leader has gone beyond his mandate as an opposition leader, and he's done certain welfare projects by distributing buses to schools. And it's a consistent project which he's been doing, distribute about 50 buses to a lot of schools around the country, and also investing in education. So he has migrated from the conventional role of the opposition versus opposing for the sake of opposing, but an opposition who is actually doing some work to the people. So I think he's trying to derive a different message as a role of the opposition. And
also, there were a certain group of people who expected, for the opposition to come together with the government. Say, for example, like during the time of the war, the entire parliament, they got together and they decided, we need to end this war, we need to unite, something like that, because we're in a crisis situation, but that really didn't happen.
But Dr. Harsha De Silva put out a blueprint, and they were all for a national government. They put out a blueprint and brought out 10 points on what should be implemented to take the country out of this crisis, and they were actually willing to join. But then the government's approach towards it was not right. When Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe became the president, and then he went and appointed for his cabinet, and he said he initially appointed a few people, and then he was calling people to come and join hands. But then he was not sincere in his initiative, and then thereafter he again went and gave positions to the existing people. So in such an environment, how can the opposition join hands? So if the president per se, if his intentions are for a national government, he must drive it. If he drives it, then there is room for the opposition to join in. But just merely by saying it doesn't work. So again, you come back to the question: is the government, is the president sincere to the cause of reform in the country? Is his intention to bring the opposition, bring all parties, unite, sit in one table and to resolve the crisis? Or is it that he wants to, work in line, in connivance with the Rajapaksas to ensure that, the existing parliament stays on, which we see, which is happening. So again, you come back to the question, the whole fact of legitimacy. If there is no legitimacy, might as well dissolve and go for elections. So
just following up on that, Dr. Saranamuthu, I think Lihini flagged in her opening statement the Sri Lankan desire to see stolen asset recovery. In your opinion, do you feel like this country is even capable of launching an initiative for the recovery of stolen assets?
I think in this country there are people who have the wherewithal, the capability, the commitment to do all of these things that we're talking about. It is a question of the government of the day getting them and giving them the task to do so. With regard to asset recovery, of course we can do it. Of course we can do it. But the question is about the political commitment to do it. I have no doubts that we can. I mean, we may not get 100% of whatever it is, but even 10%.
And Shahid, I'd like to, now we talk about the political situation in the country, the political crisis. Now the economic crisis is very much at the center of all of this, and that's what I think affects the people more, because it affects, cost of living and all of that. We like to bring up these grim, predictions of what the next year would be. But I'm pretty sure Sri Lanka is not the only country who has seen this kind of transition, this has gone through this kind of trouble. In your expert opinion, can you give an example of like another country that has gone through this, and through that, what can we expect for the next year in the literature of economics?
Yeah, so for me, I think the country that so far looks to be very similar in the way that the crisis unfolded. The reasons for the crisis in all these countries are always going to be different, but same patterns, of course. It's probably
Sri Lanka is obviously very unique to the world.
Every country ends up being very unique to each other. The reasons are always very unique, but there are plenty of similarities. So I think one country that I think is very instructive is Indonesia in 1997 and 1998. Their recession, like again, not government debt, private sector debt was their problem. Budget deficits weren't necessarily the problem, but again, it's a lot of hot money, what you call it, random investment money coming in and then coming out of the country. A lot of the reasons are different, but their crisis was sharper than ours, and it was a lot more horrific than ours as well. You're talking about, I think, their crisis devolved at one point to race riots. Thousands of people were killed on the streets. Their food transport infrastructure in Indonesia, especially given the country's more of an archipelago, again, severely disrupted. Lots of people were starving, days, weeks, eating whatever they could find around them. So it was very much worse than us, even on the economic indicators. Right, their currency went from what for Sri Lanka would it be? The currency went from 200 to 1,200. So obviously, much worse than what happened for Sri Lanka, 200, 365. Interest rates went higher.
Was this within a span of many years or like
1 year? Again, one year.
Okay.
Basically, what Sri Lanka went through this year, but multiplied by a few factors. And again, what ended up happening, this was during the Suharto regime, again a very long-lasting family regime, got kicked out of power. Again, in a bit of a similarity, the person who came in was very much, was his vice president who came in, instituted all kinds of reforms. Again, things weren't perfect. There were a lot of criticism, especially on the governance front. There's plenty of criticism. For example, asset recovery wasn't something that really happened to any reasonable degree after that crisis. But again, in 2 years' time, things slowly start to recover. But I think the critical message for Sri Lanka from that is that the recovery period is one where the economy is extremely fragile. That means any system, any political shock, any external shock, any social shock, anything can set the economic situation aflame again. That, however, is different from what we saw in 2022, where this is a shock that happens while we are slowly starting to recover, whereas a shock that happens on the way down. So the shock would be something that again, destabilizes the system, but on the process of going up. So you might not see in some ways, some parts of the country would not see the shock as much. Some parts would see it more, but you would also, in some ways, see the slow, gradual recovery continuing. Things will very much still be painful in that context, and I think that fragility of the economy is, one, again, for me, a key reason why all these kinds of, anything that brings about trust and confidence in the system is required, because, if you have some kind of shock that does come in and, change the way the economic system goes, then it just leads to more pain. I'm still broadly confident that even if there is more pain, the trajectory is that of an overall trajectory, at least on average, of improvement. But that pain is still there, and I think avoiding that pain is still something that's very well worth it.
And I think before the show started, before the show started, we were talking like Sri Lanka can't take another hit. Like we can't take another COVID or another natural disaster because we are very, very vulnerable. If something like that happens, like, do you think the government is on the right track to like have a buffer and can we afford another?
So my question was actually, what are the safety nets to protect against external shocks?
So there's absolutely nothing that we can do as a buffer. We have no money, dollars or rupees, enough to create buffers for the entire system. That is just completely out of the picture. That's difficult for many other countries as well in this context. For Sri Lanka, that's just completely a no. What we can do, and what I think here is a place where engaging with the international system, with the IMF, and then critically with the multilateral institutions like the World Bank, the ADB, the AIIB can help us, is that we can create safety nets for those who need it the most. So the World Bank, even this year, had funded an expansion of some of but that's under a very restricted situation where they can't lend more to Sri Lanka, but just repurposing existing loans. What happens when they are able to lend significant amounts more? I think that opens up the situation for Sri Lanka to set in, especially social safety structures that are better than what we have had in the past, and ones that can, in the context of maybe not saving the Sri Lankan structure from an external shock, but the most vulnerable can be saved. That can extend into things like setting up unemployment insurance, something that can, on the pathways to some sort of labor reform, setting some sort of funded unemployment insurance, sending up voluntary retirement schemes. These are things where that international funding can then directly link into. So I think the way that we can save the Sri Lankan people, or at least protect as many Sri Lankans as possible from an external shock, from even a local shock, will be through that engagement process, because Sri Lanka right now really does not have the ability to do so. I mean, that has been squandered away mostly over the last few years, but also very much over decades. That ability is just something we don't have anymore.
And where exactly are we in our debt restructuring process? Because, the IMF bailout keeps getting pushed back, and it was initially December, then it's January, now I believe it's March.
It was initially supposed to be in October, then November, then it was December.
It keeps getting pushed back. So where exactly are we? Because,
So the biggest, the issue there, and I think Dr. Sara mentioned this as well, we are waiting on what we call financing assurances from primarily bilateral creditors. What that means is we need them to agree in some form, and the form is something that's been an issue, in some form that they will not force Sri Lanka or ask Sri Lanka to repay them during the period of the IMF program. So basically the IMF needs to know that their money won't go to pay India, China, Japan, etc. Now, that part of it, from what I understand, all these countries are in agreement with that. India, China, Japan, all of them are in agreement in that on principle. But on top of that, there's the geopolitics. What kind of assurances China provides might not be acceptable to Japan. What Japan provides might not be acceptable to India. So there's all that geopolitics of that entire situation kind of playing off each other, which means that while even if the individual countries provide their own assurances, those assurances have to be considered sufficient enough by the other creditors, and then thereby the US has an influence at the IMF board itself, so that influence comes into play. So all of these people have to agree that the assurances given to Sri Lanka are credible enough. The issue is that more what they call quote-unquote friendly noises were given in the past for some other countries, and that situation hasn't worked out too well. There hasn't been a lot of progress. So now it seems like these countries, the IMF as well, are just pushing for something more concrete. Getting that and dealing through the geopolitics of it has really been the concern. After that, on the our bondholders, I think that's a process that will take longer than what the government is talking about. But that hopefully is something that by the end of 2023, start of 2024, perhaps we can look at some sort of resolution. But that's also something to keep looking at, to keep trying to kind of understand what kind of issues could come up in that process. So that process still remains very much a difficult one.
And do we have a contingency plan supposing this bailout package doesn't come in the first half of next year?
So I think my personal view is that it's unlikely that it won't. I think it's a bit of an outside scenario for it to completely not happen. It can happen very much. And again, my personal view there is that once the situation, given what is happening in other countries as well, you would probably see some sort of agreement on the first level. I think that the issue comes in how long can that be sustained. Again, Sri Lanka can quote unquote go without the IMF. That is possible. It's just that happens at a much higher level of pain, right? So instead of, I'll use the currency as just a rough example and use Indonesia's case, like I said earlier, instead of settling at 365, you might be settling at higher levels. I won't say any specific number, but at higher levels, and then you stabilize at that level. So it's the level of pain that the country is willing to take that really happens. There's no other magic bullet solution that comes in, no other money that comes in. There's nothing else. The only way that we will fix the external side, either we get some money through this process, or we depreciate the currency further and buy dollars in to get that same result.
Lihini, I want to ask you now to talk about the economic situation, and you specifically said people need to focus more on policy when it comes to voting in the election. Yeah. But then the majority of the people in Sri Lanka, they mostly vote for fleeting promises, things that are more attainable in the short term rather than the long term. So it is very critical to communicate these policies to the masses. Yeah. So the SJB and the opposition, what do you have in mind to do in the next year to reach out the grassroots and to communicate your policies and your decisions to the people?
So right now, I think if you take SJB, we've been having asana balamandalas and the meetings, and also more ground level work has been happening. And our political policy more or less has been communicating the right thing to the people versus, the popularistic narrative, saying what exactly we will do and what exactly can be done versus saying, over-promising, saying, we will give you jobs, that kind of thing, which has always been the narrative in this country. So I think from a politician point of view, I would say is politicians in this country must communicate the right narrative to the people. I think, promising jobs, promising, welfare-related politics is what has got us into this particular situation. You will go and vote for the most popularistic person in your area, be it the drug dealer, be it the person who comes and, comes to your funeral or to your wedding, the most popular person. That has been the how politics in Sri Lanka has evolved, which has resulted in the people who we see in parliament today. And then again, it goes back to the position of who do we give nominations to. I mean, our nomination criteria, it has always been to the person who can spend most of the money, who is more popular, who has the power versus educated people.
Can you clarify what are the SJB's criteria when it comes to?
No, SJB, there is a nomination board, and people's their political history, all of that will be considered, and the nominations will be given to the right people. I mean, that is what we are pushing for, and also encouraging more women representation, 25% women representation, 25% youth representation, bringing new faces. I mean, I can say in our areas, even local councils, I mean, we are trying to bring in new people, I mean, who will be different to the existing lot. I mean, who can go to councils, actually talk about policy, and who can stand up for the right thing. I mean, again, then when you talk about policy and the people, if you take I want to bring this fact about the local councils. I mean, today, if you really see who the people, I mean, I as a councillor can say who people who sit in the local councils are actually a problem in this country. I mean, you don't see educated, honest people taking office there. I mean, local councils are far more corrupt. I mean, we say parliament is corrupt. There the big deals happen here. I mean, if you can even take if the brickstone of a council can talk, they will say that itself is corrupt. Everything from the plan to passing a plan to the garbage truck to collecting to everything. I mean, the type of people, the caliber of people that represent, there is an issue. I mean, there are no nomination criteria. I mean, you give your nominations to the most popularistic person, the Nagarika Mantris, who is there with the people. Do you want the most popular person to come, or do you want the person who will do the right thing? And who will stand? But it doesn't work like that. So ideally, there are no criteria in this country, saying at least you have to have basic O-level education. There is nothing. I mean, there are criteria for everything, but not when it comes to politics. So ideally, what should happen in this country, at least political parties must come to some kind of a consensus, saying when we give nominations, we will give nominations to these people with a drug history, people who have a criminal history, or people who have been charged with murder, rape. We will not give nominations. So that kind of basic understanding needs to come in. I mean, it's pointless you saying, we push for elections, but if the same people, the rogues, are getting re-elected, then there is an issue. So.
And you brought up this very important point about corruption. Corruption is, I would say, by far the main reason why we are in this mess.
Yeah.
So if the SJB takes power, now corruption is very institutionalized in Sri Lanka. What can we expect? What will you change? What will you do different?
Law enforcement in this country needs to be far stronger. I mean, there are independent commissions. The independent commissions must operate independently. The bribery commission, all these institutions, the law authorities, the police commissions, the public service commissions, the promotions, all of this. I mean, again, it depends on the leader who sits. If the leader is a law-abiding leader, if the leader wants to get the things done in the right way, then the system will fall in line. What happens is political favorations, that has been the name of the game. But if the leader who sits at the top, if his intention right there is to make sure that this country, we create at least minimize corruption. If laws are implemented, law enforcement authorities are further empowered. If the legal system, if it's far more robust, then things will fall in line. I think that is what SJB is pushing for, and that is what the Honourable Opposition Leader has been saying, how we will ensure that the law enforcement authorities act independently. I think that is what is required. I mean, no country developed with corruption. We are corrupt at every level, be it not just the politician. Why aren't we talking about the government servant? The government servant encourages the politician to be a corrupt official. I mean, I can say with our local councils how the government servants are working in connivance with the mayors to make things work. I mean, are the government servants today standing up against corrupt politicians? No. Because at the end of the day, they are the taxpayer. They are directly accountable to the taxpayer. So we must ensure that the government servants are also empowered. Again, it all boils down to the political culture. Again, it boils down to the leader who sits at the top, what his motive, what his intentions are. If you are a leader who protects the rogues, yes, we will have the same thing repeating. But if you are a leader, a steadfast leader who will say no to corruption, and give authorities, bring in those independent commissions, give them the power to function, we can hope for something better.
Lihini, do you feel like Sri Lankans can expect to see Aragalia influence in local government? As in, do you believe that they could contend in their own faction in 2023?
Sorry, I didn't get to. As in, you're saying the Aragalia will be a part of?
Yeah, the faces of the Aragalia participating in local government.
I think there's already a party registered.
There's already a couple of parties, and also we can say in our areas that there are people. I mean, in different areas there were people
who will contest independently.
They will contest independently, and they will bring in.
How successful do you think that bid would be?
It is something interesting to see how what their narrative and how they will put their policies, or how they will position themselves. At the end of the day, I mean, you need to get people also who knows what to do. I mean, we saw yes, educated people need to come in, but you also need to understand how the system runs also, which is also important. I mean, who can work the system, who can do the right thing, who can work together with the government servants to get things going. I mean, yes, we need policy people, you need educated people, but you also need a mix between the two. People who can be hands-on work. So again, local council elections, I would say, will be a good test. But, there needs to be something way above that to how to reform the local councils also. I mean, we see the Act 1981, which has not been revised, how the mayors have enormous powers and how they work outside the law. I mean, how the local council structures have not evolved. So these things also need to be taken into consideration, and there is massive reforms that needs to happen there as well. How can councils be profit centers versus cost centers? I mean, nobody's talking about it. You have so many councillors, you have massive staffs, staff recruited outside the cadre. I mean, I can give a few examples from the council that I said. I mean, our main income is tax assessment incomes, but they are not collected. Then how the malpractices that happens in garbage collection trucks. Then when it comes to planned passings, the drainage systems, how they are not constructed according to conformity. So, you know, the whole system needs to be relooked at as well. So you need to bring in people who can do something different versus the same conventional thinking repeating. What is the role of a Nagarika Mantri? To sit there and make sure that your light is put on and, you know, road is clean? Or is it that you need the system to work? What happens is you look at the faces, no? What people today say is, I know the Nagarika Mantri, because I know the Nagarika Mantri, I can get my light and my drain cleaned and all that. Which is not the case. The council should do it. We need to push the council to do it. So you need to have policymakers who will get it done, versus, you know, who's who getting things done. So that this is what I'm saying. The whole system needs a complete overhaul. So this is what we call system change, and you need to get people who can actually who has the knowledge and the wisdom to get the system change going.
Dr. Pakisauti, now we're again looking at a local government election. Besides making known the people's mandate to the government, to the world, to the rest of the people, and bringing a finality on that, what other purpose would the local government elections serve? Like, besides that, what else would come out of it?
To begin with, it's a local government election. It's not a national election in terms of to Parliament or to the office of the Chief Executive of the country. And in that respect, it shouldn't be blown out of proportion as being something that is, you know, decisive and deterministic and whatever. But you also have to take the context and the circumstances in which it takes place. This will be the first time the people have a chance to go and exercise their franchise after the tumultuous events of 2022. And I think in terms of any kind of democratic system, you need to give space for people to let out steam. Otherwise, the whole thing works on its own. It sort of clams up and then implodes or explodes or whatever the term is. I think you need to let off that steam, you know. So in that respect, I think it's absolutely healthy and important for the vitality and the health of our democracy for there to be that election. You know, and secondly, of course, the point about it is this, is that yes, because of the circumstances that we're in, people will talk about it as some kind of test of the government's popularity. But the government should concede that to a certain extent and point out that at a local election, there are a number of cases at which people vote for the individuals who are contesting. They've got nothing to do with the parties. You know, there are all sorts of reasons as to why the idea that it is a decisive test of the government's popularity is not at all certain. You know, so you have to ask yourself, what is the key benefit from having a local election? And I would say that it is good for the democratic health of the country because it allows people to let off steam. And yes, it will give an indication of what people think this government is doing and whether they approve of it or not.
And also, Dr. Pakisauti, now I keep bringing up this fact, like, has the people's mentality actually changed? Because at the height of the Aragalaya, we saw even the adult generation, although they did not protest, they took the side of the youth, they took the side of the Aragalaya, and they were like, yes, we need change. But then the government was very clever in downplaying the Aragalaya during this time. So do you think that in this year that history would repeat and that the government would still be in power after an election? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think the government, what the government has done is it has changed the dominant narrative. They've talked about a good Aragalaya and a bad Aragalaya.
Yeah.
So now what we're seeing is the notion that the good Aragalaya is not protesting anymore. It's the bad Aragalaya. That is the IUSF and the Peratugami and all of that. And they try to draw the lines back to 1988-89 and the whole JVP, that second insurrection. So they've scared off the middle class. They've scared off the middle class, who also have got their QR code, and they've got...
So have they been scared off? Like, do they actually want to stay away from the Aragalaya now? What do you think?
No, I think they do not want to be associated with a party who they are being told wants to get rid of Parliament, wants to get rid of all these institutions and all of that they have come to believe are sacred and absolutely necessary for parliamentary democracy. But I think the point is this is that if you hit them in the gut, and if it hurts them very badly, then they will come out, and they're going to come out not because they want constitutional reform or whatever, but because they can't support their families and all of that. It's going to be basic issues like that might bring people out.
Yeah, speaking about that now, the coal crisis is coming up. Like, we know there's a delay in a coal shipment, and this would indefinitely lead to like extended long power cuts when the year starts off. So that's not a good start for an year.
No, sure.
And that'll definitely cripple the economy as well. So could this be the catalyst of like a bigger movement? Like, could this lead to like other problems? Like, what do you think? It's an open question. Any three of you can answer.
Well, I mean, it could be a catalyst because, you know, we've had power cuts before, and we will continue to have them, no doubt. But if they're going to be absolutely crippling in terms of the health services and provision of food and all of that, sure, dissent will build up again. I don't know whether it's going to, you know, burst out into a sort of Aragalaya type.
So the prediction is that it will be around 10 to 15 hour power cuts a day, which is, yeah.
I think that is
8
not
to 10.
substantiated. Right?
Yeah, I mean,
There are
it's more
different
like a
factors saying different things.
Exactly, exactly.
None of us really know how long power cuts will be there or anything of that sort. But Dr. Pakisoti, just on this, presumption that we went on, saying that people will voice their dissent against the government and the local government elections will be like a litmus test. And given the scenario where the government does lose dearly at the local government election, do you think there would then be calls on part of the people, since they have already made their mandate known, for the president to dissolve parliament and go for a general election, and the agitation on that front will proceed with more vigor?
There could be calls where the president does not have to listen to those calls. I mean, he can turn around and say, look, we've had an election, you have voted, and if it is the case that a substantial members of the population have voted against his government and their policies, okay, you've told us that we should change our policies, so now we'll look into it.
So that's
the president doesn't have to listen to what people say in a local government election in terms of deciding on whether there should be a national election or not. I think the question with regard to the national election is about that fundamental question of the legitimacy of the government, about bringing whether people from the Aragalaya want to come into parliament and all of that kind of thing. But it is about having a government that has the trust and confidence of the people.
I mean, I think we've traveled beyond the scope of a reasonable person, because a reasonable person would think that once, with the events that happened in 2022, with the government being thrown out the way that they were after having already won a 2/3 majority and a presidential election, that any reasonable person would expect a new president, whoever came in, to dissolve parliament at the first possible instance and give the people that opportunity to elect a fresh government. But that hasn't happened, and which is why I'm speaking in terms of presuming certain matters. So do you think that the people will push harder for a general election, and if so, do you think there is a possibility of holding a general election before the natural term of this parliament ends?
Well, look, at the present moment, we are expecting local government elections. There are no demonstrations in the country that I am aware of demanding a general election or a presidential election. What we do know is that some of us in civil society and political parties make the point about the legitimacy and about trust and confidence. So I don't think people are going to go around and demand an election or anything like that. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. If the government in power if they demonstrate that they have a plan to get us out of this mess, and if they talk to the people and say, look, we have to, yes, all of us, make more sacrifices. If the taxation system is not going to be weighted in one way and squeeze out the middle class, if there is no reduction in terms of a horrendous military budget, which eclipses, health and education.
Combined.
All of those things. The government has to be accountable to the people and say why we are not touching this. Why haven't we started trying to do anything about recovery of assets?
But Dr.
Why
Palaswati,
have
when you say all of us need to make sacrifices, one thing that I always find funny is the fact that, take for example a simple issue, power outages. People in this country had power outages for 10, 15 hours, and now still there are power outages for about 2.5 hours. But this is not the case when it comes to the residences of politicians or the residences of top class, top brass people in Sri Lanka. It's not the case. They don't really feel it, do they?
No, they don't, and that is why the people came out in the Aragal era as well.
But they still don't feel it.
No, so if they feel that this is still a major problem, that the system is iniquitous and that it privileges only certain people, then they will come out. There is going to be some change, and I hope there will be that change, because we need to redraw the social contract in this country. We need to get rid of an executive presidency. We need to bring Parliament and make it much more accountable, and make Parliament, hold it accountable to it, holding government ministries, etc., accountable for how they spend their money. We have a right to information legislation. We need to make sure that ordinary citizens file RTI petitions to find out how their money is being spent at the local level. Those are things that we can do ourselves.
Chayu, there is much talk about 10 billion rupees being spent on the local government election. Even recently I heard several politicians saying, we need to find out who are the people demanding for a local government election that will cost us $10 billion, because those people are the true traitors of this country, because children don't have food to eat, and they cite different other reasons. But my question to you is, how much would this really impact on the entire economy, given the current predicament that we're in? Holding a local government election for 10 billion rupees, and probably other elections in years to come, but let's just confine ourselves to the local government election. Is the effect on the economy as big as they say it is?
So I think, especially when comparing it to the possible benefits of having an election, improving the legitimacy of the system, improving confidence in people in power, all of that, I think on a net basis, definitely it's worth it. I think also that once you get into numbers like billions, numbers start to lose meaning, right? Billion is a big amount. That's all people understand. I think human beings just simply can't understand the concept of large numbers. So I think it's a worth enough cost to. To put into kind of context, I think our true. We spend trillions of rupees. I think in our debt servicing cost in terms of our local debt alone is some 8 trillion rupees, as I recall, for in terms of some of the bonds that we hold. Just absolutely much, like you're talking about thousands of times more than just 10 billion rupees. So in terms of in scale, it's a large amount, because a billion of anything is a large amount. But in the context of the economy, I think it's a cost that's even if it is a cost, I think it's worth taking.
Lihini, this year we saw an excessive use of illegal force against civilians by police officers, and it caught global attention, police brutality in Sri Lanka. What can we expect regarding this in the coming year? Do we see this issue being addressed? Do we see it being flagged by international watchdogs? Do you see policymakers addressing it?
So police brutality at any level cannot be accepted. Why police brutality came in such a strong manner is because citizens were actually coming out, dissenting opinions, dissenting thoughts, and citizens were actually exercising their fundamental rights, which is an inherent right given to them. To use that to control the citizen, police brutality is not the way to go. So again, police brutality does not transpire in its own. The politicians are also involved in it, politicians' instructions, all of that happens. So again, when you look at it in totality, it is also the leader who governs the country, whether that person is a democratic favoring leader. If you are a politician, if you are a leader who respects democracy, you will not bring in police brutality and you will not bring oppression when citizens get on the road to protest. So this is the thing which we repeatedly see. I mean, politicians today fail to understand why the citizens came onto the road, why they expressed their dissenting views. Why? Because they were truly oppressed, because they were not, I mean, the citizen, the government's duty is to ensure that the basics of the citizens are provided, which the government failed. So it is natural for the citizen to get on the road, which is their right. And you know, the way what the government should do is address the problem and not the messenger. But we see, you know, when the people are rising up, you just shut down the people, so which results in further escalation. Police brutality, I mean, if they continue to oppress a citizen, it can even lead to a bloodshed. Which is that what the government wants is also a question. I mean, then the government can go back and say, look, because the people rose up against it and we could not control the government. So it can also be a government planned initiative, effort to say, you know, because the citizens were rising all the time, we could not control we could not bring the economy. I mean, that's one of the arguments. They say, you know, when the tourists don't come into the country, it is because the citizens are always protesting. But that is not the case. The citizens are coming because they are actually oppressed. And is the government doing the right thing to address? No. I mean, today also we see certain policy decisions that have been taken. I mean, if you take the Inland Revenue Bill, the tax hikes, even the CEB tariffs, the hikes that have been brought in. I mean, the power and energy minister is increasing the tariff rates, but he's not taking measures to restructure the CEB, which is a concern. I mean, you see so many state-owned enterprises which are loss-making. I mean, we have about 1.5 million of state government servants. I mean, you don't have to cut down. You can do, there's job rotation, job enlargement. There are certain measures that you can take. But is the government doing the right thing? Which is what the citizen is always questioning. I mean, if you really go and see the Aragalaya, the narratives, what they came out, what they spoke of certain taboo topics which the politicians also never wanted to touch. But there was some valuable things that the citizens were actually talking. But the government was not willing to listen. So is it to silence the citizen, or is it to listen to what the citizen is saying and act upon it? This is, I mean, it is fair enough, no? The citizen, what are they fighting for? They're fighting for their future, they're fighting for their dreams, they're fighting for their aspirations. Sri Lankan today, average Sri Lankan today, do not want to go abroad. I mean, you see parents leaving their children and going overseas. You see married couples being separated. How heartbreaking it is. You see aged parents in this country while the daughters and the sons are overseas. I mean, this country, the leaders of this country have not created an environment where the citizen can actually have a future. So this is why the citizen is protesting. So you need to listen to the voice of the citizen, not bring in police brutality and shut down the dissenting opinion. We don't have leaders, empathetic leaders who are actually concerned about our people. They're not empathetic. They're not concerned about the citizens or the average citizen's needs. It is always about being in power. If not, you will not have 539 billion invested on a defense budget versus education and health being crippled. You will not have women's rights, child's rights being discarded. I mean, something which I always say. Yes, country has a problem, country has an economic problem, but certain policy decisions can be taken to uplift the citizens' well-being, which the government is not doing. Pass the gender equality bills, bring in the LGBTQ rights in this country. I mean, create an environment where it is safer for the citizen to live. Ensure law enforcement authorities can function in a better environment. Bring in measures to curtail corruption. Why aren't they doing that? Yes, the economy is crippling, but if you actually have the intention of fixing issues in this country, you still can do it. Why not bring in proper social safety nets to ensure people are taken care of? Why not invest, bring in your educational systems, bring in technology, bring in all that to ensure that your next generation of this country are taken care of? Why not be sensitive towards the children who are suffering from malnutrition? Why not put your money there? This is what the people are talking about. Is the government listening? No. So what? Then you come and say, you know, that the police is being put down to curtail the dissenting voice of the people. So again, now we see, if you take the Aragalaya, certain fractions of the people came to the road. Today the Aragalaya, as Mrs. Sarvan said, it's the IUSF and the Peratugamis and all that. But the actual Aragalaya was the people of this country who got onto the road, the crying citizen who actually wanted a better Sri Lanka. That is the Aragalaya. That is what the leaders of this country need to understand, that the way they have governed is not the way to govern, and people are dissatisfied. You don't want leaders who will be in power for their own benefit, for their families and for their generations to earn out of state living. State money is state money. State money is not personal money. You come to politics, you do it, you leave a legacy and go. You don't, take your money for your generations. But that is what we have been seeing in this country. So this is what the people are saying, give our money back. Create an environment where we can live in peace. This is basics what the people are asking. Is it fair? Is it not fair? It's fair for the people to ask. The politician is not listening. So I think, 2023, if the politicians continue to oppress the citizens and curtail the citizens' voice, the citizens will come out far stronger. And it is time politicians of this country also understand that, they no longer can hoodwink the people. The people will actually stand up, and it will be far more harder and stronger the next time.
Dr. Parkesoti, on this topic of passing legislation, I think Lihini mentioned several pieces of legislation, like, maybe a transgender bill, even for animal rights.
Animal rights,
yes,
gender equality.
Animal welfare acts. On the passage of these bills, post Aragalaya, post what happened in 2022, do you see any, what can I say, do you see any more priority given on setting up these structures among parliamentarians and in Parliament since the incidents that took place this year?
Well, as far as the political and governance reforms are concerned, we got the 22nd Amendment or the 21st Amendment or whatever, right? We are being told that there is a lot of work being done in strengthening the oversight committees in Parliament. The ability of Parliament to pass new legislation, of course, depends entirely on the SLPP majority, which is now broken up into 3 or 4 factions or whatever it is, coming together, or indeed, if they don't come together, the SJB also deciding to give the government the support to pass that. Now, I think that is one question of whether they have the expectation that they have the support to pass legislation. The other one, of course, is that certain kinds of legislation may be deemed by them to be electorally unpopular, and therefore they won't come up with it. Because,
any examples, Doctor?
Well, if you take, for example, LGBTQI. Now, there is entirely a possibility that people will go around the country and talk about this is sinful, this is this is that, whatever. There is that possibility. These are things that have happened in the past. So if they feel that they are going to be electorally punished for trying to bring legislation with regard to X or Y, then they will desist from doing it. And they will probably turn around and tell you, if you talk to one of the political leaders, that, look, when we get the majority, then we'll pass it. So therefore, give us the majority if you want us to pass it. So that's the thing. At the end of the day, politics is about power. It's all very well and good for us to sort of say that they should do X and Y and Z, but it is about power. And let's not make any mistake with regard to it.
We've got a question from one of our viewers to Lihini, and the question says, the points raised by you are idealistic and good, however, they've questioned as to if this is your stance or the stance of your party entirely.
Good question. No, my stance is also the party's stance. Party is also talking along the same lines. If you listen to what Mr. Iran Vikramaratne Harsha, what they talk, is also along the same lines. How we know how the hard decisions must be taken, how reforms must happen, how leaders need to be far more accountable, the legitimacy, the transparency, accountability, stolen assets recovery. These are things that the party talks almost like, on press conferences on a daily basis.
And the viewers also raised concerns regarding, the projects that were carried out by the party while the party is in opposition, going beyond social welfare projects and so far and so forth. The viewer is of the opinion that maybe those who contributed to these social welfare projects will come to cash in on their investment after the SJP comes to power?
It's at the end of the day, it's how the opposition leader handles it. I mean, there are people who help. I mean, on what basis it's been taken. I mean, he at one point said that, you know, they don't get involved, that the funder directly funds the particular project. I mean, it's how they handle it. I believe, you know, these are good projects done with a good intention. I hope it is not with, you know, vested interests. I mean, that is not what we all expect. I mean, if the person at the end of the day is expecting that, then, you know, we are also in a sorry situation. But I don't think it is that. I mean, if not, he wouldn't be able to do these enormous projects up to this extent. I mean, he's been distributing over 50 buses and so many things, I mean, of a certain magnitude. So, again, going back, this is what the opinions that I express is also what SJB stands for. If not, you know, this is what we would like to see in a country. I mean, we represent a party, we represent these policies, we represent these politics, and that is the politics that we want to see in this country.
Shayad, just because you are taking a more optimistic stance on this, household purchasing power has drastically declined this year, from the beginning of this year. What is the assurance that you feel can be given to, you know, low-income households that are feeling it the most, that are being affected the most?
So, when I say that I'm more optimistic than others, it's in the sense that I am less pessimistic on the future more than I'm more optimistic. Let's put it that way. But okay, so on the household purchasing power point, I think at the lower end of Sri Lanka's socioeconomic groups, the kind of purchasing power that you have, right? I think a lot of us who are in urban settings don't necessarily see that. But the purchasing power is obviously at a very different kind of level, much lower in terms of magnitude, also in terms of the quality of socioeconomic purchases. Now, the question is, can that kind of purchase continue? One, the absolute basic necessities, can they continue? One. Two, can there be some sort of upward mobility? It won't happen immediately, of course, but the pathway for upward mobility, will that continue? Obviously, I can't give any assurances to anyone. I'm not in that space. But what I would say is that I think the way that, especially in the lower socioeconomic groups, that the support comes is from some sort of social safety net. So from a government's point of view, I think that is where that side of it has to be critically supported. As I understand, there is quite a lot of work being done on the Welfare Benefits Board, and there is being, I heard someone say, more progress made, in the year of the crisis than, multiple years before that. But again, just because there's progress made doesn't mean that, you have results just yet, right? So the question is, how soon can you get those results, and how useful are those results? I think now individual poverty lines across the country are somewhere about 13,000-14,000 rupees per month per person, and how can you create a situation where where the people who require that kind of support really gets it? I think on terms of the cost of living, now we're seeing inflation slowing down. We're actually seeing some prices actually starting to fall. Hopefully that trend continues, unless there's an additional round of depreciation, a significant round of depreciation. Hopefully we don't see another inflationary shock. So prices stabilizing and some of them falling is hopefully the way forward. So that also should provide some sort of relief in the short term. Again, no, I don't think we are at any level going to go back to the level that we were, 2021 anytime soon. At least a year or two away for 2021, but get back to our last high point in purchasing power somewhere in 2018. So get to that probably the latter part of this decade. But again, at the bottom end, it's very
latter part of this decade.
Latter part of this decade to get to the purchasing power of where we had in
the purchasing power.
Years, you mean?
Yeah, basically, this concept that when countries go through a debt crisis, you end up with a lost decade, and you lose a decade of purchasing power. Not in terms of your GDP number, but in terms of what you can buy, in terms of real dollar terms, what you can. So short term, I think it's about support for those who really need it the most. Inflation slowing down and possibly some prices falling should help in the short term. But it's also then about how we sustain the trajectory moving forward. Are we going to go back to the same model of economic growth and development that we had, which we have seen proven to be completely unsustainable and leads to this kind of massive crash? Or are we going to use this opportunity to kind of restructure the way the economy works? Now, that's not an easy task in any way. That's really difficult, of course. Some steps are being taken. Again, the complexities, the the issues that have built up over the last 10, 15 years, and then beyond, before that as well, have really made solving it quite difficult. So I mean, just one example is on the on the energy sector, on CEP, just dealing with the losses that have not recovering the losses of the past, but the fact that all the decisions, all the policy decisions, everything that has been taken in the past has resulted in such a complicated mess right now, means that even no one's going to buy that. Very straightforward, right? You need to deal with that problem first before you're going to anyone's going to even put a toe into that pool. So dealing with that, difficult, because at every single step of the way, and it's not just at the top, not just a certain union, not just a certain employee, at every single level, this structure has become entrenched, because this has been a structure that has, for those involved with it, worked really well, given them a lot of benefit, a lot of profit, a lot of power over the the last.
Given them
individually, and as well as everyone indirectly involved. So that point on corruption, I think, is a critical one, because let's take, for example, I mean, let's just take this glass, this drinking glass. Let's say the government says everyone who has a drinking glass gets 100,000 rupee tax cut. I mean, let's say they do that for some sort of corrupt reason, but then every single honest businessman would want to do that. Every single honest person would say, let's just have as many glasses as possible, because that just is the smart thing to do. That means that this industry grows up, and everything associated with that now gets entrenched in that structure. That's, I mean, if that policy comes about, that's a ridiculously stupid policy, obviously. But imagine now, if you have that policy for decades, taking that policy away. All the industries that got sucked into that mess, all the honest people who based their lives around what this the economy had done to them, are now suddenly going to be yanked out of it, right? So these might be perfectly honest people, and you might be undoing one of the stupidest mistakes that you could have made, but still it's painful. And that is, I think, where a lot of that is, for me, one reason why corruption is actually quite hard to deal with in a place like Sri Lanka economically, because it's not just the corrupt, it's the perfectly honest as well, who have, not of their own will, it's not their fault, but they've also gotten indirectly dependent on that structure, on that economic structure, and fixing corruption ultimately hurts them as well. So I think, again, it is up to any government, any administration to say, look, we're fixing this for this reason. It will be painful for you. I think that communication has to come across very clearly on why it's happening, how it's happening. And once again, it's the trust and confidence that you build in the structure, that the people's, at least to some extent, that people's best interests are behind this policy move. I think that kind of thing is really not really happening to the extent that it should, and that remains a significant risk moving forward.
Chai, just speaking about the year 2022, there were a lot of bad decisions that were supposedly corrected, some policy changes that were brought about, but then there are still those who say that what happened before the government fell, before the ministers resigned, before the new central bank governor came into power, was correct. Specifically, speaking even of the former central bank governor, he gave out a statement saying that what's better, to pay your loans back or not to pay your loans back? And he faulted the central bank governor for defaulting on our sovereign debt, and said that we should have kept on paying, and things would have gone as planned if the government wasn't overturned. Now, the reason why I'm posing you this question is because, well, in Sri Lanka we have this habit, at least, of seeing something extremely wrong, and then finding an alternative, putting that in place. But when that doesn't work out, we don't go finding for a third alternative. We just say, okay, this didn't work, let's just go back to doing what we did before and bring that again. So just to address that point, how would you see it?
So, I mean, this is one reason people don't like economists. We have no consensus on anything. We don't agree on anything. But
the economists and lawyers.
But I think on that point, on Sri Lanka's, I'll take two of those points. One is we couldn't have continued paying our loans because we just ran out of dollars. Like we couldn't.
But the former central bank governor says we could have. He had a plan.
He paid the $500 and...
There's no dollars. There's no plan, clearly. No, but I mean, let's put that aside. The other point is that, so the reason I think this time around there is a certain difference, not a huge one, that we won't go back to that past model of development, is that I think it's harder to do so now. I think that past model of development was based off and was made possible through a very specific set of economic circumstances that do not exist anymore. Very simply, the ability to access cheap loans locally as well as globally. That is just not really there anymore, and it's going to be harder to get back to a place where you can get back there for a few more years. So I think my view is that if you try to reverse once again, go back to that point, I think whereas earlier you could get some debt from somewhere, keep things going for a few years before then making some, and that's been the trajectory of Sri Lanka. Actually, while you talk about this debt sustainability questions and all, Sri Lanka went close to this 100% of GDP mark sometime in the late 90s, in the 70s, in the 50s, in the 40s. It's been a cycle that we've been going through. We get into some sort of problem, we do just enough reforms to get out of it, and then we go back to the same path. The difference,
like the fact that we've gone to the IMF about 16 times.
Exactly, it's exactly the same thing that's been happening over and over again at a different magnitude, and that's the critical point. The magnitude is so much worse now that I personally feel that there's no space to return back. The moment you try to return back, I think all of these problems, they don't turn up in 3 years like they did in the past. They turn up in like 3 months. They turn up in 3 weeks. I think now there is far smaller space for any government to reverse back on those policies, one. And two, I do think that governments will be very wary of taking those same decisions again, because I think regardless of how they think they can handle it, I don't think any government wants to run the risk of going through another popular protest or run the risk of getting back to that stage. So I think that will be one part of why they might not want to. But secondly, even if they want to and try to, I think there's no space for that anymore. So you immediately essentially try to reverse the reversal essentially.
So you're saying,
I want to actually ask you now, the tax thing that he brought up was actually something that is very critical, but then going into the new year, now we can expect everyone who earns a salary above 100,000 to be taxed. Now this, like you said earlier, is directly targeted on the middle class, and you said when the middle class feels something that they do come out and they push back. So can we expect the middle class just take this, or what are the repercussions we can expect from this for the coming year?
Well, I think the repercussions are already there to be seen, and that is that the middle class is looking for a way of getting out of this country.
Yeah. Then again,
big way to get out of this country in terms of the professional people.
Yeah.
And we're talking between the ages of roughly between the ages of 18 and 45 or whatever it is, everyone is trying to get out. What are the statistics? I think it's now close to maybe about 1 million people who are planning to go out. So, this country is going to be denuded of human capital.
But Dr. Pagaswati, the people who are moving out, they're not necessarily, I know a lot of people, at least in my understanding, who are not really moving out in their professional capacity. Some people are just going abroad to find some form of employment. I think even we ran a few news stories where a manager at a bank in Sri Lanka had gone abroad to work on a fishing boat. And I think this individual passed away, unfortunately, and that's the reason why the story became news. So against such a backdrop, I think people are just feeling helpless, hopeless, and that's the reason why they are planning on leaving to find some sort of employment. There are hundreds of people who are in different countries, going to those countries on visit visas, with plans on, just overstaying their visa.
All a reference of the desperation that they have. They obviously feel that the grass is a lot greener on the other side, that there is no damn grass here, or that it's absolutely parched, And so, we have to also think about when we celebrate 100 years of independence in 2048, what is the situation of this country going to be?
2048?
Yeah.
You think we'll get there?
Well, 75 years next year, maybe in another 25 years. What are we going to be? What kind of are we going to have a tea industry? For example, I seriously have my doubts.
And Dr. Pagaswati, talking about the brain drain, now that's the main issue that we have in the country. Now another trend of mass, migration that we saw in the country was during the war. Do you think now it's worse, or it's the same thing that we saw?
Well, you have Tamils who went out.
Yeah.
Now you have Sinhalese who are going out.
Everyone basically, all Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so You know, as I said before, what happened to China is going to happen to the rest of the country.
But Dr. Pagasoti, now, speaking to these people who are maybe planning on leaving or are feeling helpless, is there any message that you can give them? Is the grass really green on the other side?
Well, if you cannot persuade them to desist from going out, try to plead with them to come back. Try to plead with them to come back.
Or at least invest in the country.
Yeah, in whatever way, not to sort of gradually sever their connections with Sri Lanka and only look upon Sri Lanka as some kind of investment opportunity to get a bigger bang for their buck. You know, that's not going to, I mean, you know, that's just going to denude this country in terms of its human potential.
But then
So, I mean, so this is why we, you know, they're going out, we're going to be denuded. We need to look at our education. We need also to think about the future. This is at one level a terrible tragedy, a catastrophe or whatever, but out of this, we have to try to build and build into the future. Sri Lankans are very bad at planning, or when they plan, they never come hold to their plans. We can't afford to do that.
So you always say tea, rubber, coconut, apparels, tourism. Can't we position Sri Lanka to be a service-based economy? You look at India, I mean, we are lawyers, legal process outsourcing, LPO market, KPO markets, knowledge-based tech markets. I mean, why can't we do that? I mean, there are so many Sri Lankans outside. How do we bring in their knowledge back into the country? I mean, you talk about remote working possibilities. I mean, artificial intelligence, so many things. I mean, even to research, rebuild Sri Lanka to be a research hub. You have the Ayurvedic thing, even the tourism, how to remodel tourism in this country, not just bring in tourists for the sake of tour. I mean, I'm sure all of you all have traveled. You see how, you know, sites have been taken, I mean, enlarged and exponentially positioned. What are we doing? We don't even know what our competitive advantage as a country is. So again, it boils down to, you know, who is leading.
A lot of conventional ideas and old school thinking.
Old school thinking.
No, but I mean, I remember, I think it was in the late 1990s or early 2000s where the current President Ranil Wickremesinghe talked about the fact that the synergies, economic synergies and all of that was between Sri Lanka and the states of South India. Now, of course, the singular nationalists will go blue in their face, saying that this is some kind of Dravidian conspiracy or whatever it is, and some confederation in the making. But we have to get rid of those ridiculous ideas.
And also, if you look at
move ahead.
Definitely, if you look at like Bangalore in India, they have had a massive revolution in like tech infrastructure.
No, why not get the professionals to draw up the policy in this country? I mean, you see politicians running ministries. I always question what knowledge they have to run a certain ministry. At least they don't even have the basic education. You take the ports minister, ports authority minister.
They haven't even worked in that
Yeah,
field.
I mean, who is ruling this country? You no wonder we are in this situation. No, we have not been led by the right people. So at least park the politicians to do certain things, get the professionals on board, get the professionals to draw up the policies. Again, you can't bring in racism and you can't bring in popularistic narrative and run the country. That's what has happened in this country. We have not done policy-based politics. We have not taken the right decisions, the hard decisions. It's always about keeping power, about illegal earning. It's about funneling corruption. It is enough. I think we need to put a halt to it. So again, you need to have the right leaders to do that. I mean, we
But
can
that
talk
really
around.
has become a culture, right? It's become an entrenched culture in the system. So it really, I mean, is it realistic to think that you can sort of change that?
Well, I mean, who could have predicted the Aragale?
Yeah.
Who could have predicted the Aragale? I mean, we have now a very powerful tool, social media. I don't think the Aragale would have happened if we didn't have social media.
Definitely, yeah.
And I'll add one more thing in terms of a specific thing that can happen and a specific and relatively simple step that can be taken by and is a very economic point though, is that once you let the currency depreciate like we have right now, I mean obviously you want to smoothen out any crazy volatility. What that does is that given the Sri Lanka's economic structure, in my view, for the last specifically for the last 10 to 15 years, but also in cycles before that, has been very much dependent on artificially controlling the currency and putting it down, strengthening the currency. That has led to the structure of the economy being very tied to the strength of the currency. And the fact is that especially over the last 10 years, since actually 2011, I think, from 2011 to 2017, as I recall, Sri Lanka borrowed on a net basis some $6 billion and then used that $6 billion just to control the currency, right? $6 billion, right? Imagine if across that period we spent $6 billion in improving the productive capacity of the country. $6 billion to just set up something like a unemployment fund to fuel labor reform. Those kinds of things could have happened. So I think letting the currency go, what that does, and in terms of having some sort of path to a steady depreciation of the currency, takes an impetus that kept a corrupt system going, including people that were perfectly honest, yes, and now takes that impetus and moves it somewhere else, and does that in a way that the corrupt system no longer has the upper hand. They don't hold the policy lever on the economic front. So now what the depreciation can do in that context is now you have a incentive for an honest business person to look, okay, this is the incentive, foreign exchange earning, we go there, we move there, because they are more agile, they have the ability to move, so forth. Whereas the more domestic focus, especially the more corrupt domestic focused individuals, the structures in the system, those who get the government set up projects just to give to their friends, the government put up policies just to help their friends. Those kinds of things aren't as fast to move into those kinds of spheres, and also because they are external focus, you don't have that benefit. You can't go and bribe the entire EU market to kind of help your business only, right? That's not possible. So I think that is a relatively simple step that can be taken to help a lot of things. My personal view is that can help a lot, and that can help a lot of the economic corruption side and at least act as a strong driver. The cost of that, however, is that prices continue to rise for longer. At a lower rate, obviously, but there is more pain on the ground in the short run. So then the point is, how do you both have this, what I feel is a powerful economic lever, but also mitigate the short-term costs of that to the people, especially given the people aren't going to directly see the benefits of that come 3, 4, 5 years down the line. So if you can balance those two factors, I think that is a relatively powerful lever that can be used. Whether that does end up being used, and this is also a very Sri Lanka focused example, but whether it does end up being used, again, very much up for debate.
Lihini, I want to ask you now, the Aragale, if anything, proved that the youth of Sri Lanka, if it is empowered, does have a huge effect, and they are very different to the generations before us. With the advent of social media and I would say, we are the youth. That's why Fascination, when we remodeled it, we focused it on the youth because we are the future. And I would say we are a very different generation because we have access to information. But then, me personally, and I think the youth in general would agree that there is a lot of obstacles for the youth to enter politics. Because, for example, you need to have the resources, the political pull, you need to have connections and all that. So the SJB being an opposition party, and also in politics in general, what can we do to give more youth representation and give to talent, basically, people who can actually do something?
So the youth we are all political animals. There's a saying, we are all political animals. There's some politics in all of us. Our lives and everything are politics. So politics in this country, I think, should no longer be a taboo. I personally can say when I invite people to come and join politics or come, people say, oh, I don't want to associate myself with politics. That has always been the narrative. It should not be the case. Now in SJB, I want to say that we have the Samagi Taruna Balavega, then there's the Young Professionals Organization. So there are different organizations within the party which actually welcomes the youth to come and join. So if you are actually interested in politics, you don't need to be a person to run for elections. You can get involved at a policy level. And there are so many platforms that you can join in and contribute. So youth watching, if you are actually interested in contributing in some way, always the party is open to, they welcome young blood to come in and contribute. So youth today also must say, instead of saying we don't want to associate ourselves with politics and politicians, you must understand that, you disassociating yourself is also not the solution. So it is important that the right people get involved in politics and the right people come into the system, and that politics is more policy based and the educated people are part of it.
But then again, it's this culture, this idea has already been established that we see the same people over
So
and
why
over
not
again.
run for local council elections? Why not come if you are a representative in your area, if you are a person who's working in your church societies, be it the youth societies, why not run for local council? Which I mean, you don't need enormous budgets to run for a local council election, which can be a starting point.
Exactly.
Why not get involved in policy-based politics? Join the young professionals organizations, the Taruna Balaway gets to come and work. You don't have to, I mean, this is what I'm saying. You can't always be criticizing the politicians. You need, if you believe in change, you need, be the change that you want to see, be the change you want to see in the world. So why not? I mean, I can say myself, I mean, okay, we also can wash our hands off.
But you can crowdsource.
Yeah. You can do politics in a different way. You don't need to be stooges of politicians. You can break the barrier.
So like how things have played out, like these activists who like came to the forefront with the Aragale and people who were very vocal during this year, do you see them coming into politics?
I think there's
a trend of it?
I think they certainly should. I think they certainly should.
I think there are some who have already started.
They can form their own. I mean, you can be a voice. You can be an activist. You can join a particular political party. See, when you join a party, you don't need to necessarily agree with everything the party does. You can, you need to create that space on how you will do politics. You can be a stooge, or you can be, a person. You can be a stooge, or you can be a person who has your own opinion and drive your opinion. So it is how you challenge the convention. Nothing becomes easy overnight, but the more people come in, you have that collectiveness that is formed, and then you can break the structural barriers. So I think it is time. Youth look at it. I mean, let's be the change we want to see in this world.
This is how we want to contest the local government.
Please join me.
So like
Dr. Pakisoti, we have a question for you as well. Now, Chayu was speaking about not a more optimistic, but a less pessimistic approach for the 2023. And one of our viewers believed that dissent from the people or protests would hinder that process. So his question typically surrounds, should protests be dissuaded in the year 2023 if Chayu's prediction is accurate?
Dissent is fundamental to a functioning democracy. Where the issue of whether dissent is going to impair or injure or whatever, it is how the government responds to it.
Exactly.
If you take dissent to be some kind of treachery or something like that, I want to stamp it out with shock or tactics, then they're also going to respond in a similar manner, or,
I think this happened on the 9th of May, I believe.
Whatever, So, I mean, there are ways in which you deal with this. There are ways in which you deal with this. We are talking about, we talked about it in terms of youth protests. The government is not a government of youth. It's a government of old people, or older people. So do older people deal with younger people by using shock or tactics?
And also there's rather selfishness if you look at the structure right now. Everyone just wants to stay in power no matter what.
The older people can't read the young people. The time the Aragale happened, it was like a stage where the politicians they could not comprehend what was going on. So that was like, they were utterly confused, I can say that. Yeah. So then the Aragale, but there are positives in the Aragale, there are negatives in the Aragale, but then the inability to understand how social media changes, how the youth moves about, it was a massive shock on the politicians.
Absolutely.
So this is what I'm saying. If the Aragale, if that movement, if it is taken in the right direction, it can bring a lot of change to this country. I mean, I don't think we no longer should tolerate these inefficient, corrupt politicians. We need to stand up against that. It is our right, because I mean, at the end of the day, as I always say, they are temporary custodians. They are not here to earn for life. And why are we? I mean, it is only during the Aragale that we came and expressed our dissenting opinions. When the wrong tax policy was brought in by Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2019, if the people came and objected to it, things would have been far more different.
And also, Dr. Pakisoti, I want to ask you now, especially the adult generation, I've heard many of them say this, that more protests we have in the country, that it has a bad image on the country, it looks bad on tourism, like tourists will be affected by it. What is your opinion on this? Like, is it actually give a bad image on the country, the more protests we see?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it might well be the case that no tourist wants to come into a country where they are using tear gas and whatever on their own citizens. But that's not the real question. No, that should be asked.
I think Dr. Pakisoti answered that question.
Yeah, why are they doing that? And that's the issue.
No, like,
if, for example,
yeah.
I mean, look at what has happened in the last couple of days. The Aragale was headquartered at Galface, right? The presidential secretariat and all of that. Now what's it? The government is trying to erase the memory of the Aragale by putting the police band there and doing carols. I was told that even the police are having a dog show. I mean, this is absurd.
Yeah.
They should have asked if they wanted to sing carols and observe Christmas, they should have invited the Aragale also to come and sing carols.
But I think like one point that people should not forget is that the more dissent that is expressed in the country internationally, it looks good on the country because it means that democracy is working.
Healthy functioning democracy.
It's a symptom of a healthy democracy.
Yeah.
So do you think we can expect more in next year, or like we see more crackdowns as the government realize this?
I think that we will have to
wait and
Well,
see.
since
let
you
time
brought-
tell. Yes, I don't think
Since you
Dr.
brought me here
Pakisoti
as an
is
analyst and
the
not an
fortune teller.
astrologer.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to our journalists for posing those questions. We're now entering the final round of Face the Nation for today, the last program for the year 2022. Each of our panelists will get a period of 3 minutes and to make their closing statements, of course, based on what was discussed here during the program. So let's start off with Dr. Pakisoti.
I think in 2023, the question of the legitimacy of whoever the government is in this country needs to be addressed. You can't parcel out problems and say this is economic and we first have to deal with the economic problem before we deal with the political. They go hand in hand. And therefore, what I would like to see is, if and when the IMF staff agreement is agreed upon, that then we move towards some kind of timetable in terms of the mandate of the government in office. Secondly, of course, whichever government there is, it must communicate with the people. That is essential in democratic politics. That they must talk to the people, explain to the people what they're doing, why they're doing, who they're doing it to, whatever. That's tremendously important. And the third thing, of course, I mean, the government has talked about, the president has talked about resolving the national question. Yeah. I mean, with regard to resolving the national question, we have a 13th Amendment to the Constitution which hasn't been fully implemented. Now, I would think the place to start is with the full implementation of the 13th Amendment. But if you implement the 13th Amendment, when are you going to have provincial council elections?
So Dr. Pakisoti, are you saying that these discussions are more or less a farce?
Well, what I'm saying to you is that no. I mean, there may well be a way in which the president and the government wants to bring the Tamil people onto their side after the elections of 2019 and 2020, and there might be some good that will come out of it.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Pakisoti Sarvanamathu, Executive Director of the Center for Policy Alternatives. We now move to Attorney at Law Lehini Fernando, Municipal Councillor, Moroto Municipal Council.
So they say when you're at your lowest, you can actually formulate yourselves to be at your highest. So I think Sri Lanka is deep down, but if we want as a nation to rise, we certainly can. But again, it all boils down to the will of the politician. But I'd like to say the president of this country, if he actually wants to make a change, he can actually do it. Whether his intentions are right is actually a question, because I mean he is one person in the parliament. He is not responsible to any of them. So I mean he's been a politician right throughout. If he wants to put the country on the right track, he can do it, but then he can't align himself with the corrupt people who actually created the issues are not the people who are going to resolve these issues. So Rajapaksas are the people who actually created and crippled the nation. So are they the ones who are going to resolve this crisis? Is certainly no. So I think 2023 Sri Lanka needs policies, complete policy overhauls, from tea, rubber, coconut to everything, to economic policies, to foreign policies, labor policies. I think a complete overhaul needs to happen in this country if you are thinking of taking the country in the right track. And again, we come to the question of having a legitimate government with a legitimacy. People's wills, aspirations must be represented. You need to govern with the right people. You cannot govern with the people, as I said, who actually created the crisis. And leaving that aside, economy is crippled, but there are certain areas in the country that actually can, like rights related to women, children, social safety, social security, creating a better environment, education policy, health policy. These actually can take forth irrespective of the issues that are happening in the country. So, see, 2023 should be a year where we fix the broader issues in the country, so that you actually create an environment for the citizens of this country to live a little bit better. And so hoping that it will not be a bad year as 2022, and that it will unfold to have some hope in this hope in Sri Lanka. So all in all, elections, it will be an election year, not just local council elections, but I think we need to go in for a general election as well. And the president must take the right decisions irrespective of his allegiances to either parties. So, that's what we hope for.
So, Lihini, you're saying that in addition to the local government elections, there could also be a general election?
I think it is time, because you can't as I said, people who created the issue will not be the ones who resolve the issues. I mean, we see, it's not about holding power or allowing a certain party to remain in power, but it is the people's right. People's voice must be heard. People must be given a chance to express their views. I mean, and then no better way than an election, and then bring in that economic stability and make the hard decisions must be taken. Reforms, we need to do these reforms. Restructuring, be it at every level. If you don't take the right decisions in this country, the country will not fall into track. Sustaining corruption network, funneling corruption will not take Sri Lanka into the right track. So, the leader who sits there needs to make the hard decisions. It will be unpopular, but the unpopular decisions have to be made if you are sincere in putting the country in the right track.
Thank you very much, Attorney at Law Lihini Fernando, Municipal Councillor from the Borato Municipal Council. And finally turn to Chayu, our economist. What's your take?
So, for me, two key points. First is that I am personally relatively confident that a few years down the line, Sri Lanka will be at a better place and on the path to a significantly better place. The point from today until, let's say, 2 to 3 years into the future might and probably will be quite volatile. There will be a lot of fragilities that get exposed. There will be specific parts of society, specific parts of the economy that get into trouble, and some people feel it more than others. But I think the overall trajectory of the Sri Lankan economy will be one of improvement. It will bottom out somewhere from now to the middle of next year, I'm thinking, and then slowly start that upward trajectory after that. Again, fragilities will remain. So the message from that part is things might look tough, and things might continue to look tough, especially if you're in one of those uncertain areas. But the pathway forward, what history shows us, what other examples shows us, is that there is a brighter path forward, and Sri Lanka is probably not one of those very few countries that completely messed it up. It does not look like we're one of those.
For example, you'd say like...
I mean, one example is, we talked about Sri Lanka, some people used to talk about Sri Lanka being like Lebanon or Zimbabwe. That's like, Lebanon would be if the rupee goes from 200 to like 40,000. Zimbabwe is like 200 going to like 10 billion. Like, it's completely out of picture. Like, that's just not what's going to happen to Sri Lanka. It's very, very unlikely for something like that to happen to Sri Lanka. But I think as we go through the reform pathway that we are going through, and a lot of that pain is felt on people. I think the tax hikes is a critical point at which you can visibly see that into the top 10-20% of the population visibly feel that. It's also then an opportunity, a great opportunity to push for very specific reforms, use that pain to lobby for some sort of give and take from the government. The government is saying, give us more taxes, what are you giving us in return? I'm talking purely economic. It also extends into the governance side of it as well. But just, if you're a corporate, if you're an individual, I'm giving you all these new taxes, what am I getting in return? And
more transparency.
There is more transparency, but even on an economic front, I think there are short-term regulatory measures that can give some sort of benefit. You can reduce red tape. You can, initiate credible processes for reform on land, labor, the things that are really critical for the growth of the economy. And I think things like that can, credible steps like that can show to the people that look, this year might be tough, but this specific plan shows that in 2024, 2025, things are not just starting to get better, but for some people could already start to be better. And I think this therefore is an opportunity for people not only to say fix expenditure, not only say, oh, the taxes are difficult for me, it's unfair, but go very specific in demands and get specific real reforms down, and accelerate those as well. I think that opportunity should not be missed. So while I think even if that doesn't happen, I think the trajectory is that of an improving Sri Lanka for over the next few years. There are things that individuals can do to accelerate that process, at least if not for the whole country, at least for the kind of areas that they're involved in, get specific lobbies done, use this moment to really push for better and better policy, better and better reform. I think that is a possibility. So both in terms of what is likely to happen, but also what can happen, what should happen. I think there is space for hope. It's just that hope comes with a lot of asterisks, with a lot of caveats, so as not to get bogged down, not to get lost, and not despair in those caveats, but keeps sight of the future that is there. I think that would be what I would close with.
Thank you very much, Chayudam Singh, an economist, for joining us on our show. Thank you once again to Attorney at Law Lihini Fernando and Dr. Pakisathi Saranamuthu. Thank you very much also to our two journalists, Shania Dedigama and Disal Kapuge. Also, thank you very much to our viewers. And since this is the last Face the Nation program for this year, I take this opportunity to wish all of our viewers a very happy, prosperous, and hopefully a painless or less pain for you to suffer next year, given by the facts that were, of course, discussed on our program today. Of course, do take care and stay safe. Thank you very much for tuning in to Face the Nation. We will see you again next year. God bless.